This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Sudan records first COVID-19 death as alarm raises over cases in IDP camps. Africa's CDC to test Madagascar's herbal COVID-19 remedy. And Ethiopian migrants head home after near-death experience in Mozambique. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers and I'll be with you for the next hour. Joining us for your business headlines is Uche.
Thanks, Hannah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Bit. U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to cut off relations with China. And we look at how some airlines are staying afloat by turning to cargo services. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Uche. We'll see you in a bit. Our top story, Chinese President Xi Jinping has had a telephone conversation with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa about the COVID-19 pandemic. While speaking to President Ramaphosa, President Xi urged the international community to step up support for Africa's fight against the pandemic and actively participate in the initiative endorsed by the Group of 20 to suspend debt service payments for the world's poorest countries. Thousands of people are struggling to make ends meet under South Africa's tough lockdown. Many have waited in long queues for food aid for the second time in 2 weeks. Here's CGTN's Tuli Shabalala with more.
South Africa has been under lockdown for more than 6 weeks. Many businesses remain closed, leaving some families without work and unable to buy food. Thousands of citizens are going hungry.
Life is difficult here at the squatter camp. It's hunger only.
Things are very tough. I can't do anything because no one is working. With the money I used to make from peace jobs, at least I was able to survive. But now it's very tough.
Various private businesses have donated food hampers to those in need in informal settlements. On the outskirts of the capital, Pretoria, the handouts have drawn massive queues. The Spruit Community Support Forum is helping to give out bags of maize meal, vegetables, face masks, soap and sanitizers.
People are hungry, they're vulnerable, the poor, the destitute, the weak, the elderly. And as civil society, together with a number of NGOs, we decided to return to the Spruit Mooiplaas area. And today, 10,000 bags of maize meal, sanitizers, food hampers, masks are being distributed because these people are desperate.
South Africa has recorded over 12,000 cases of the coronavirus. Government has not fully lifted lockdown measures, which means greater hardship for those that live hand to mouth. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Somalia has announced 65 new coronavirus cases during the past 24 hours. That brings the total number of infections to 1,284, while the death toll stands at 54. Reports have also emerged that up to 40 African Union peacekeepers have tested positive for COVID-19. Earlier, we spoke to CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello in Mogadishu for the latest.
Well, Somalia yesterday confirmed 65 cases, as you've mentioned earlier, making it at equal level with Djibouti. That was the country that had the highest number of COVID-19 infections in the Horn of Africa. So with 1,284 confirmed COVID-19 infections, 52 deaths and 130 recoveries, it seems like Somalia is becoming the next COVID-19 hotspot in Eastern and the Horn of Africa region. And the issue of insecurity also plays out. during this pandemic, the government has placed a lockdown and curfews here in Mogadishu, but militant group Al-Shabaab continues to carry out deadly assassinations and attacks targeting security forces as well as members of the public here in Somalia, including 2 medical doctors who were killed during the first one was killed in March and the second one was killed in April. So Al-Shabaab remains the biggest challenge to the Somali government in terms of movement, in terms of the fight against COVID-19. And as you've mentioned, insecurity plays out as the biggest challenge because the government of Somalia only relies on air transport to provide logistical support to hospitals across much of the country, apart from Puntland and Somaliland. The rest, the government relies on air transport to take medicine and vital protective equipments to doctors in areas outside of Mogadishu. And Al-Shabaab maintains a huge presence towards towns and villages adjacent to these towns. So the town of Barawe, for instance, the government announced yesterday 1 fatality from COVID-19. And last month, Al-Shabaab launched 2 deadly bomb attacks on an AMISOM base next to the Barawe International Airport. So the Somali government, even though it's prioritizing the fight against COVID-19, it needs to maintain its efforts in countering the insurgent group so that it doesn't affect the government effort of weakening, rather suppressing the spread of COVID-19. There's no official word yet from AMISOM, but media reports indicate that 40 African Union troops, mainly from the Ugandan and the Burundian contingent, have tested positive for COVID-19. But what we know so far is one Ugandan soldier tested positive towards the end of last month for COVID-19 here in Mogadishu, and he was placed in isolation, and AMISOM says that he has undergone treatment and is responding to treatment. But when that soldier tested positive for the virus, AMISOM also said that a number of soldiers who were in contact with the patient were taken also for quarantine to be observed whether or not they contracted the virus. So we don't know if the contact tracing expanded and brought in a huge number of soldiers, but one thing to note is the African Union force AMISOM says that it's taking this issue very seriously. It has placed a lockdown on its African Union headquarters here in Mogadishu. And also one thing important to note is the base that hosts AMISOM in Mogadishu is quite big. It's next to the Mogadishu International Airport, and it's also home to the United Nations that also tested a number of positive cases among its staff in recent weeks, and it's also home to foreign embassies and missions. So most probably what experts here is saying that probably because of the number of cases that were recorded inside this camp, chances are that due to the interaction among soldiers and the United Nations staff, chances are that most likely many people contracted COVID-19 while inside that camp.
On to South Sudan now, where it has recorded its first death toll from the coronavirus pandemic. The health ministry announced the country's first case of COVID back in April.
The deceased victim presented to a military hospital in a critical condition, and on arrival at the hospital, he was considered to be a suspect, and while arrangements were being made for referral to the John Garang Infectious Disease Center, the victim sadly succumbed to his illness, and the results came out today confirming the cause of death to be respiratory failure due to COVID-19 infection.
Staying in South Sudan, the country joins other East African nations in easing lockdowns. However, there are increasing concerns about the potential impact COVID-19 will have on the health of communities living in internal displacement camps in the country.
The environment in which many displaced people live are without easy access to clean water and healthcare services. South Sudan has eased some of its restrictions, including reopening internal travel, markets, restaurants, and reducing curfew time. But displaced people in camps still risk not getting the support they need.
We're particularly concerned that there have been a couple of cases mentioned or tested positive in the camp here just outside Juba. Now there are tens of thousands of internally displaced persons living there, so they live in quite cramped conditions.
The standard measures like social isolation is nearly impossible. people in displaced camps live in congested shelters.
It's not just the camp, but we've also got prisons, we've got hospitals, and many parts of Juba are quite low income but high density. So you've got the same kinds of problems with lots of people living in quite a confined area, and it is very difficult for them to fulfill all of those measures.
For example, in our rooms, you find 10 people in the same room, or you find 3 people in the same mosquito net. From there, how can we put the rule that says that make one distance?
With such living conditions, it could be difficult to control and contain the spread of COVID-19 should it enter camps. Chamhono, CGTN.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will test a plant-based tonic that the president of Madagascar says can prevent and potentially cure COVID-19. The government of Madagascar has agreed to send samples of the herbal drink after the AU requested that it be allowed to determine the mixture's safety and efficacy. The World Health Organization has repeatedly warned that the product has not yet been clinically tested. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi has more from Addis Ababa.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will lead the testing of Madagascar's COVID organics, a herbal tonic containing ingredients including artemisia, known to be an anti-malaria component.
What will it take for us to know whether to use this COVID organic or not is, one, to get more data, more information about this COVID organic. Has a trial been done? If yes, what are the data? So let's see the data, then we can advise as appropriate. If some of these have not been done, then jointly we can look into how we can carry out this clinical trial to better understand the safety and the efficacy of this agent.
Several African nations like the Gambia have already received their consignments of the tonic, while some other countries have also placed their orders. The president of Madagascar, Andry Rajoelina, has touted it as a treatment for COVID-19 and claims that if a European country had discovered the remedy, there wouldn't be as much skepticism about it. The Africa CDC says testing will be given priority.
No. It doesn't take a long time because usually for emergency setting, we have mechanism that is put in place to fast track all these regulatory approval in terms of carrying out the research and approving the product that is coming out of that research.
The World Health Organization has warned that the efficacy of the product is unproven and there is no proven cure for COVID-19 yet globally. Officials say they are now in touch and offering support to the Malagasy government. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Authorities in Nigeria have reported that at least 470 people have died over the last few weeks in the northeastern state of Yobe. This has prompted fears that the coronavirus could be spreading rapidly through the country. Correspondent Phil Ihaza reports from Abuja.
The Yobe State Commissioner for Health, Mohammed Lawan Ghana, says most of the people who died in the past 5 weeks were either the elderly or those with underlying health issues. Ghana says preliminary investigations of a verbal autopsy conducted in the state show that most of the deaths are linked to illnesses like fever, hypertension, diabetes, and renal disease. He, however, stated that at least 16 relatives of some of the deceased have shown symptoms of COVID-19 and have all been taken to an isolation facility in the state.
We want to believe that this death rate in the region could be attributable to issues of sanitation, hygiene, and the level of information and education that should be going on around the people.
In the last few weeks, there have been hundreds of similar deaths recorded across northern Nigeria, including the most populous state in the region, Kano. Nigeria's Minister of Health, Osage Hanire, says investigations are ongoing to ascertain the actual cause of these deaths in the northern part of the country. Experts say the government may need to hasten its investigations and conclude its findings to enable health officials respond appropriately to the situation.
If it is COVID-19, they should know, so that we will know that we have to take a lot of health emergencies, supplying them with PPEs, supplying them with enough test kits and everything, so that they can respond to it.
The federal government says various teams of medical practitioners have been deployed to the north to respond to illnesses other than COVID-19, and it has urged citizens not to panic or spread unconfirmed reports of the situation there. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Tunisia has not recorded any new COVID-19 infections for the 5th consecutive day. The country's Ministry of Health says that none of the 2,200 tests carried out, including 45 on patients already diagnosed with the disease, were positive. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi has the details.
The overall COVID-19 infections stand. There are 217 active cases, which are still under observation, out of which only 3 are still in hospital.
We've recorded 0 new coronavirus infections thanks to the effort of all stakeholders, the medical and the paramedical staff, the security forces, the army, the public administration, the national organization and the civil society.
Required until further notice.
If people respect the prevention measures, this will allow us to permit more business sectors to open gradually while adapting the restrictions and the targeted health confinement to the new situation.
Tunisia's Minister of Health has called for more vigilance to prevent the disease spreading and to preserve the positive results obtained during the 6 weeks of the general lockdown.
Yes, the morale is high with 0 infections, but we must remain vigilant because new cases or a new cluster could appear anywhere and at any time. We still have people in self-isolation and confinement. We share the happiness of Tunisians, but we are still in a critical stage.
According to the COVID-19 task force, the number of tests carried out on individuals showing symptoms among those who have called the emergency line 190 has decreased from an average of 70 to 8 daily tests. At the peak of the coronavirus crisis, the number of tests carried out had reached 120 tests per day. Tunisian Premier Yassir Farfakh and the National Observatory of New and Emerging Diseases have called for more vigilance and practicing of preventive and sanitary measures in public spaces and shops to keep the disease under control. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Algeria has started producing rapid test kits for the novel coronavirus. The kits have a detection time of 15 minutes, and the country can now produce 200,000 units per week. The North African country has so far reported over 5,000 infections. The immunology department in the hospital of Beni Messous, based in the capital Algiers, has developed the test kits in partnership with the Canadian and Jordanian firms.
The novelty after practicing rapid detection of the coronavirus for 2 months is that Algeria will produce its own COVID tests locally for the first time, and I think that this is something that can help us in the efforts to fight against the virus, and the extension in the number of analyses by producing 200,000 detection units by week is a good thing and can cover national needs.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news, including Ethiopian migrants head home after near-death experience in Mozambique. And conservation crisis. We'll tell you how the COVID-19 pandemic is threatening Africa's wildlife.
Women are not given the opportunity. Somebody tells them, oh, flying is very risky and dangerous, and so it's not good for women, and they don't make better pilots.
I see Patricia rising and continuing to lead as she does, but adding to some of her skill set and licenses. I know she'll end up in Ghana, but just how high she'll reach, I'm pretty sure you'll see her setting some world records before very long as well.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. The coronavirus may have been in Florida weeks before the first official case. CGTN spoke exclusively to one woman who says she reported her symptoms to authorities but was ignored. Nitsa Soledad Perez has the story.
At least 170 Florida patients started reporting symptoms associated with COVID-19 on January 1st. A newly identified Florida patient, 67-year-old Thais Tepper, had almost all of the symptoms more than a month before Florida reported its first cases.
It started with a headache, a very strange headache. Then I had very irritated eyes. They were felt very dry. After that, I just woke up with a cough, and I have really, really bad cough, like a racking cough, and higher fever and tightness in my chest.
On February 3rd, Tepper went to an urgent care facility in Naples, Florida.
So they tested me for strep, tested me for flu, and I walked out and was sick. They did not know. I was sick for another probably 7 days.
Tepper heard about the COVID-19 antibody test. She found a company that would perform the test for her.
She came and she got tested the first week, more or less, that we started testing, and she tested positive. The body starts producing IgG antibodies, and the reason why we want to test her is because we want to see how long is this IgG going to be positive.
CGTN accompanied Tepper to her second antibody test. Her first test was on April 8th, the second a month later. Both came positive for the coronavirus antibody. The company says its test has a 96% sensitivity rate, making it highly accurate.
From what I'm seeing, it definitely was here before they said it was.
This past week, 2 Florida local newspapers, the Palm Beach Post and the Miami Herald, identified possible early cases based on patient symptoms. State health officials had documented suspected COVID-19 patients between January 1st and February 29th of 2020.
I think it's very likely that the virus was here. In January, February, that's also our flu season, and it's nearly impossible to determine if it's the flu or it's not the flu, or that it has been around for a while.
When Thais Tepper tried to inform health authorities she had the virus earlier, she said they ignored her.
No one contacted me. I've never been contacted by the health department. My case is not counted.
New test results show COVID-19 has been spreading in American communities earlier and on the opposite side of the country. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Coronavirus cases continue to surge in the U.S. The country has reported more than 1.4 million infections and over 85,000 deaths. Meanwhile, U.S. health authorities have issued an alert over a rare inflammatory disease in children believed to be linked to COVID-19. Symptoms include fever, rash, and organ inflammation. The state of New York has reported 102 such cases, which doctors say can infect children up to 16 years old. They are calling it pediatric multi-symptom inflammatory syndrome. The symptoms are similar to Kawasaki disease, which mainly affects children under the age of 5. France is blasting one of its pharmaceutical giants after its chief executive said the United States would likely get priority for COVID-19 vaccine.
I can guarantee that when we have a vaccine, we will do everything necessary so that the French people, the Europeans, the whole planet can benefit from it in solidarity. So I think it was unfortunate phrasing, from what I understand, maybe taken out of context. And I was reassured by the call I had with the boss of Sanofi France and by his statement this morning.
French officials say they will hold talks with Sanofi executives next week. Sanofi CEO Paul Hudson sparked outrage after saying American patients would be first in line since the U.S. government had helped fund their work. Well, back in March, 64 migrants were found dead at the back of a truck in Mozambique. The migrants from Ethiopia were being smuggled into South Africa to work. 14 others were found alive when the truck was searched. Authorities say the dead likely suffocated in the container. Their story underpins the dangers that migrants face and why people still risk their lives to escape poverty and persecution at home. One survivor describes the horror as dozens suffocated in the back of the truck.
Crowded in a container, Degina de Gaffa says panic spread quickly. A mass of arms and legs failed out, and then a deathly silence ensued.
I was lying on my back. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was a cloudy sky, and that is how I knew that I was alive. I saw dead bodies and people standing. I realized they were the people who had traveled with me.
He was one of only 14 survivors, rescued from the back of a truck on the Malawi-Mozambique border on the 24th of March. It took weeks before they could be repatriated to Ethiopia by the International Organization for Migration.
When we spoke to some of them, they already have friends and family in South Africa, so they were going there because of the information they've been receiving about South Africa as a country where they could work and make a good living and send money back home to their family.
Unfortunately, many never lived to see the promised land. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
As the world battles a new deadly coronavirus believed to have been started by the zoonotic transmission of the virus from wild animals to humans, South Africa is in the process of expanding and intensifying the captive breeding of certain of its wild animals to sell as food. Renee Delcarme has this report.
The South African government's plan to beef up its Meat Safety Act appeared in the country's government gazette at the end of February. The act, which has regulated meat production for the past 2 decades, has now been expanded to include threatened and endangered wildlife species such as rhinos, elephants, and giraffes.
WWF have been following these developments closely and are particularly concerned by the inclusion of threatened species, especially rhinoceros, within the new legislation, as well as regarding the lack of clarity on how animal products are covered by the Act, especially for species facing conservation implications due to illegal trade in high-value products.
The sustainable use of wildlife is enshrined in South Africa's constitution, and as food insecurity increases, particularly in poor rural communities, so has the demand for cheap meat for human and animal consumption.
You're further concerned about the lack of separation within broader taxonomic groups, in which some species may not be threatened, yet others of high conservation concern, as well as the inclusion of a clause relating to all other species of animals not mentioned above, including birds, fish, and reptiles that may be slaughtered as food for human and animal consumption.
The South African government has listed over 100 edible wildlife species, from zebras to crocodiles, kudu to gemsbok, and springbok to wildebeest. Conservationists say because the list includes some endangered species, their slaughter must be in line with the most relevant conservation regulations.
South Africa has got a good history of conserving species well, and that recovery then creates opportunities to utilize the values that those species do give to the citizens of the country. And in addition to that, when we have systems like we currently have, where people have hard times through a lockdown period, and often in such times people cope by using some wildlife resources. So that's why we are very keen on helping and supporting our neighbours in terms of overcoming some of the particular challenges around food security and the kind of hunger challenges that people may have.
Critics of South Africa's Meat Safety Act say critically endangered species such as the rhino should be conserved and protected, not slaughtered and eaten. This at a time when the World Health Organization has warned that global hunger and starvation could be the next pandemic. Renee Delcarme, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
The coronavirus pandemic is also having an impact on wildlife. With no revenues from tourism coming in, protecting endangered wildlife has become much more challenging.
Armed rangers in Kenya's Ol Pajeta Conservancy are in pursuit of poachers. The conservancy is home to over 130 black rhinos, the single largest population in East and Central Africa. There are fears that the coronavirus pandemic could increase poaching. Experts say poachers, like many desperate to make a living, may become more daring.
We are more alert, especially this area. It's very easy for poachers to come and kill a rhino and run away because we are a lot of rhinos are next to the first line. it's very easy for them to get a means of transport. So we usually put a lot of effort or a lot of patrol or deployment within this area. Regarding COVID, still we are more alert, because I think maybe more poaching will be used at this time to come in to poach.
Decades of poaching have taken a heavy toll on rhinos and resources. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the already dire situation.
We estimate that we spend somewhere in the region of $10,000 per year per rhino to protect them from poaching. So in our case, that comes to close to $2 million a year, which is spent purely on the security that is required to prevent rhinos from being poached. And in the time of COVID, when tourism has completely stopped, where most of our revenue comes from tourism, the revenue that we need to earn to protect our rhinos comes from tourism, it's a complete disaster. And our ability, our operational capacity as a result of that lost revenue, which we estimate this year will be something in the region of $3 to $4 million, is severely compromised, and in turn, therefore, our ability to look after rhinos is compromised.
But there's still hope. The population of black rhinos had been growing by an annual rate of 2.5% between 2012 and 2018 to more than 5,600. That's according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature. That growth has been attributed to effective law enforcement. It seems patrols like this taking place today will make a difference. Chom Hono, CGTN.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more news, including the latest action in the world of sport. But for now, let's hand over to Uche for the latest in business.
Thank you, Hannah. And coming up on Africa Live Bits. U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to cut off relations with China. And we look at how some airlines are staying afloat by turning to cargo services.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
U.S. President Donald Trump has escalated his rhetoric towards China over the pandemic. In a TV interview, the U.S. leader threatened to cut off the entire relationship with Beijing, claiming it will save Washington about $500 billion US. Now, he also repeated unproven allegations about the origins of the coronavirus. But a former White House official in the Trump administration is now blaming the U.S. leader for the severity of the crisis.
They should have never let this happen.
And at the Obama administration during a visit to a medical supply company in Pennsylvania.
We were left virtually none.
The president is vowing that from now on the U.S. will manufacture as much of its medical supplies as possible.
Every day you prove that American workers are truly the best in the world, and that's what they are. And we're showing that now. We're starting to make more and more product in the United States.
But back in Washington, the finger was being firmly pointed at the president and his team. Rick Bright, until recently an official in the Trump administration, said he was moved from his job as director of the U.S. Vaccine Agency after he pushed back against the use of untested medicines the president was pushing. Testifying to the U.S. Congress, Bright painted a picture of an administration in denial, slow to react, and torn by infighting.
I believe we could have done better. I believe there are critical steps that we did not take in time. And those urges, those alarms were not responded to with action.
Bright also warned that if the US government doesn't act more quickly, then the winter of 2020 could be the darkest in modern history. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is dismissing his allegations and continues to focus on reopening the US economy. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Meanwhile, the chief at a time when the coronavirus pandemic has pushed the global economy and international trade into turmoil, facing downturns not seen since the Great Depression. Azevedo says he made the decision for personal reasons.
This August, I will complete 7 years as WTO Director General, and I have decided that I will step down from my current position on 31 August 2020, this year, cutting short my second term in office by exactly 1 year. My tenure as WTO Director General has been the most demanding, exciting, and gratifying period in my professional life. I have learned a great deal. My decision was reached after long and hard reflection and much discussion with my family for the reasons that I have outlined.
Well, let's head back to the continent now. Sudan has put in place a system of money transfers to assist the poor. It is a step towards removing costly fuel subsidies in order to end an economic crisis. Finance Minister Ibrahim El-Badawi says vulnerable families will get around $9 a month from the second half of this year. Retired public servants will also see their monthly pensions increased. Some 65% of the population lives below the poverty line. The new civilian government is trying, with the help of donors, to launch a series of economic and political reforms after veteran ruler Omar al-Bashir was ousted in April 2019. The government will use aid pledged by the European Union worth about $495 million to fund its economic reforms. A donor conference planned for June has been postponed due to COVID-19. Meanwhile, Africa's aviation sector is facing tough times amidst the coronavirus pandemic. With travel restrictions and border shutdowns, many airlines have now turned to cargo services in order to survive. Here's CGTN's Nick Mudimba with more on the situation here in Kenya.
Kenya Airways is banking on cargo for revenue while passenger flights remain suspended. The national carrier has converted 4 of its wide-body passenger planes, and it's leased an additional 12 aircrafts to expand its cargo arm. But other airlines have also had the same idea to shift to transporting goods amid the coronavirus pandemic.
We've had increased frequencies with other international lines that have actually realized the deficit that existed in the market.
With flights grounded, the Kenya Airports Authority, which manages the country's main airports, is also struggling. The passenger traffic means the majority of its revenue streams have dried up, so it's also relying on cargo until regular international and domestic flights resume.
We are going to uphold the air cargo strategy and, of course, value proposition, which focuses majorly on speed, but right now we'll be able to fulfill punctuality, visibility, and of course predictability of supply chains. And that's the way we can only plug ourselves into global supply chains.
Even a top global logistics firm like Schenker said they have been adjusting, with its staff advised to work from home.
People are our strongest asset. And this is one time I've actually seen people really come out and become creative, resilient, being able to come up quickly with solutions. And that has allowed us to pass those solutions to the customers and prosper.
But even cargo isn't a sure thing. At another logistics company, Panalpina Group, staff are busy getting fresh flowers ready for export. It connects flower farms in Kenya to buyers in Europe. But it said end markets have been unpredictable.
It's been very tough since, I think, since the beginning of March. Initially we saw a decline in tonnages, because a lot of our customers are shipping to the auctions in Holland, and the auctions more or less closed down for a couple of weeks. So we saw a significant decline in the exports. Subsequent to that, a lot of the airlines withdrew capacity from the market, because when the passenger flights stopped around the rest of the world, there was a significant pressure on the freighter capacity. So they had to move the airlines elsewhere to support things like import of medical equipment for hospitals. You've had countries where, due to lockdown, florists have not been allowed to stay open. You've had countries where, because the florists couldn't stay open, the governments have prohibited sales of flowers entirely for a period of time.
Just last year, aviation was touted as the key to unlocking Kenya's economy, accounting to 4.6% of GDP. But experts are predicting a slow recovery for the global aviation industry. And it's unclear how airlines will operate in a post-pandemic world if they manage to survive. It's indeed a beehive of activities right here at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, cargo airside. And this is to make sure everyone around the globe who has been affected in one way or another by COVID-19 is sorted, from the horticultural services, from the pharmaceuticals, all under this project to make sure that indeed even those who are trying to make sure that ends meet are stable. 36,000 workers are working, all courtesy of the cargo business going on here in Nairobi. For CGTN, my name is Nick Mudimba at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, the COVID-19 crisis has changed the way businesses around the world are being run, with lockdowns and social distancing forcing many to work from home. In Uganda, real estate developers have raised concerns about the long-term damage it could do to the sector. There are warnings of a severe drop in sales and occupancy rates, particularly in terms of office space. Isabel Nakiria reports.
Virtual workspaces are becoming the new norm, but the shift to online instead of office is having a knock-on effect. Real estate managers say occupancy in commercial buildings is dropping as businesses adapt to new ways of operating amid COVID-19, while property owners are finding they are unable to collect rents.
Especially people in the commercial environment, they are going to face some challenges because offices are going to be a bit digital. People are realizing that actually you can work from home and still be able to operate. People are going to downsize spaces in view of cutting the overheads in terms of rent.
Even as countries begin to ease lockdowns, growth in the sector could be slow. Developers foresee a drop in business expansion and new spaces to let.
This is a time when many businesses are not going to be looking to expand, but rather to sit down and practice financial resilience to see if they can ride out the storm and try and stabilize cash flows. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of letting activity.
Property agencies say many estate developers are struggling to finance bank loans, and the lockdown will stress them even more.
The underutilization of space in offices as a result of social distancing is also going to have an impact on profitability and profit margins, and eventually capital values. And it is going to stress businesses, because where you had, say, 115 or 100 members of staff, now you can only have 40.
This growth has been eminently attacked, and a massive slackdown is being witnessed ever since the outbreak of the pandemic. It's evident that the immediate impact has been a severe drop in real estate transactions. Despite the government easing on lockdown restrictions, developers remain uncertain on when business will pick up or rents paid. Economists predict hard times ahead for the sector, and it could take long for things to get back to what they were before COVID-19. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, Zimbabwe will introduce higher denomination banknotes to increase the amount of cash in circulation. We'll have those details coming up at the top of the hour. Now it's back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Usha. We're going to take a short break and return. Here's what you can expect. Cooking under lockdown, South African chef launches a digital culinary guide to creative home cooking.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
To South Africa now, where a Cape Town chef has launched a new e-cookbook. The book is inspired by meals he created during the lockdown. Chef Jason Whitehead's digital publication is not only a culinary guide to creative home cooking, but also a diary of his journey through the entire process. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
South Africa's lockdown may have caused frustration for many people, but it's also become a creative outlet for some, especially when it comes to sharpening up their culinary skills. That includes chef and author Jason Whitehead, who was confined during lockdown as the country dealt with the COVID-19 outbreak. He, though, chose to be socially constructive with his time by creating a lockdown e-cookbook.
As all of us in South Africa that were put onto lockdown, I was trying to think of ways to keep myself busy, and I started documenting every day how I was feeling, stating the COVID stats, with the whole idea of being a chef in quarantine in South Africa so that people could understand what it was like in a different country. I obviously had to eat, and I decided to then document all of the meals that I made, did the recipes, and kind of joined the two together.
It is, though, all in aid of a good cause, and the book was created in order to raise funds for Streetscapes, an NGO that assists the homeless and those caught up in the criminal justice system through creating work opportunities in community gardens. Proceeds of the cookbook are being channeled to assist their work.
It's 100% of that money goes directly to the beneficiary, so none of it even stays with us. So we're trying to create more opportunities, and that opportunity doesn't just include your work opportunity, it's also a place to stay and all the psychosocial support that you need.
The chef may be known for his French cooking at his bistro in Cape Town's foreshore, but he now spends quite a lot of time tending to his other passion, charitable work. Now, the lockdown cookbook may be inspired by traditional South African dishes, but they are meals that can be cooked just about anywhere in the world.
There's a lot of South African dishes, like one of them is a babuti, which is it's more Cape Malay actually, so it's quite unique to South Africa. Anybody can buy it from anywhere around the world.
The book costs just over $6 and can be bought online. And even though the lockdown still may be in effect in many countries across the world, there's certainly no reason not to indulge in some fine dining inspired meals from the comfort of one's home. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Your sport news is coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. South Africa's triathlete Henry Schoeman targets gold at next year's Olympic Games.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's time now for your sport news. Henry Schoeman claimed South Africa's first ever medal in the triathlon at the 2016 Olympic Games at Rio, 4 years on after his victory at the 2018 Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Schoeman has set sights on claiming the Rainbow Nation's first triathlon goal at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in Japan, which will be held next year in actually 2021. CGTN's CS Duplessis has more.
A lot is expected of Henry Schoeman after his success in 2016 and 2018, and the talented triathlete is aware that he is very much a medal hopeful in Tokyo. But now, with the event postponed for a year, the Durban resident has had to hit the reset button on his Olympic aspirations for the time being.
I was kind of relieved because I felt like a lot of pressure came off my shoulders at that time, and completely agree with the IOC. as an athlete, I've invested so much into this race coming in a few months' time. It took a little bit of a knock mentally, physically, financially. So yeah, I'm in mixed emotions, you know, but I think it's right now, it's fair what they did to all the athletes around the world.
The 28-year-old started off the year in impressive style by finishing third in his first ever half Ironman, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, events ground to a halt. The lockdown was enforced in South Africa, leaving him no other option but to adapt his intense training regime.
Being used to training so many hours in a day, at a swimming pool, at an athletics track, on the roads. Right now I'm confined to my house, but I'm very fortunate to be able to adapt training on a treadmill, on a bike setup, and very fortunate to have a backyard pool, which I'm able to tie an elastic band around my waist and still do some swimming and keep the feel of the water.
Skuman is just entering his prime and has already established himself as one of the best triathletes on the planet. His iron will and endless gas tank make him one of the serious medal contenders for the event in Tokyo. And the fact that he's already tasted Olympic success will ensure he is even more determined to claim gold in 2021. CS Duplessis, CGTN, Johannesburg.
Kenya's iconic safari rally that was due to return to the World Rally Championship roster this year has been postponed to 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic. That's according to organizers and government, who confirmed it on Friday. In a statement signed by the country's Minister for Sport, Dr. Amina Mohammed, the decision was made following an agreement between the government of Kenya, WRC promoter, and the International Automobile Association. It considered the effects of the coronavirus disease on global economies, cross-border travel, and mass social engagements. The event will now take place at a suitable date to be announced later. The safari, billed as the world's toughest rally, was due to return to the WRC roster between the 16th and the 19th of July after an 18-year hiatus as Africa's leg of the global championship. World Half Marathon record holder and three-time World Half champion Geoffrey Kamworor has regretted that the coronavirus pandemic struck at a time when he was in top shape. However, speaking at a third webinar meeting hosted by the National Olympic Committee, Kenya, Kamworor said he was rearing up to pick up from where he'd left off when the crisis was over.
When the competition is resumed, we will get to come back stronger, because this is part of the challenge, and we have accepted the challenge, and we have took it as part to our next achievement. So let him expect the greatest results after the pandemic.
The International Olympics Committee has revealed that it has set aside an $800 million fund for loans and payments to